Our panel of journalists and editors will look at the role of mass media on urban development and how journalism contributes to conversations on cities and governance. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, Kumar Manish. He's a founder of Urban Voices, a news and views platform dedicated to cities for people. Urban Voices raises issues, amplifies voices, and documents good practices on urban issues. He has worked as a senior correspondent with the Times of India and has covered City Beat extensively, focusing on BRTS, cycle sharing, and NMT. Naresh Fernandes is the editor of Scroll, a digital news publication. He's the author of City Adrift, a short biography of Bombay, and Taj Mahal Foxtrot, the story of Bombay's jazz age. Meera K. co-founded Citizen Matters, an award-winning civic media platform focusing on critical urban issues, ideas, and solutions for cities. Citizen Matters empowers citizens with the knowledge, understanding, and tools to make cities sustainable, equitable, and livable. Meera also helped initiate Open City, an urban data platform. Dhanya Rajendran is co-founder and the editor-in-chief of the News Minute, a digital publication that covers South India. In a journalism career spanning 19 years, Dhanya has a body of work focusing on politics, human rights, gender-based violence, and disaster coverage. In just 8 years, Dhanya's news portal, The News Minute, has become a leading, comprehensive source for breaking news reports and crucial stories from South Indian states, driven by the editor-in-chief's passion for ground reporting and storytelling. Our moderator for the evening, Kanchan Kaur, is Dean, Indian Institute of Journalism and New Media, Bangalore. She's also an India assessor for the International Fact-Checking Network, which certifies fact-checking websites. She has driven IIJNM's emphasis on multimedia and works on promoting news literacy. Over to you, Kanchan.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here on this cloudy, threatening to rain evening. People will tell you rains in Bangalore in May are rather unusual. I don't know why, because I've grown up here, and let me tell you that the new school year would start in May. For some reason, the date May 24 stays in my mind, and the rains would come just the same day. New school shoes would get soaking wet. You had to put them by the stove to get them dry by the next morning. But the point is, we all get nostalgic when we talk about our cities, and we always think about how wonderful they were in the past and what happened to them now. But if you look at the ways cities are marketed and look at them in the marketing sphere, they're always dynamic, they are looking forward, and they're progressing into this bright tomorrow, and the best place to be in the future is to be in the cities. Except, of course, when they have a glorious past and they have heritage sites and neighborhoods and so on and so forth. And one of the most, I think, critical components of a city is the culture of the city. But then, how much of a role does the media have in creating this image of the city, in actually influencing a transformation, in addressing urban issues, raising awareness, and influencing actually policy decisions and enabling citizen engagement? That is the burden of our panel today. We'll start with each one of us talking about our cities and the relationship our media houses have with it and take it there. I think we'll start with someone who's from another city, because I'm afraid this is soon going to turn into a Bangalore story. So Naresh, would you please? Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, so guilty as charged. I'm from Bombay, a city that in myth is where everybody comes to fulfill their dreams. But in reality can be so chaotic that it draws researchers from around the world to try to figure out how it actually still functions. And as a result, over the last couple of decades, I think there's been more writing about Bombay than there has been about any other Indian city, and also about many other cities around the world. We have had academic books, we've had research papers, we've had novels, we've had popular non-fiction books like Suketu Mehta's Maximum City, I think being a case in point. And we've had a lot of journalism. But over the last decade, I think the quantity of journalism has decreased, and that is for the very simple reason that the number of publications has decreased. And so over the last 4 or 5 years, for instance, DNA has closed a paper called the Afternoon Dispatch in Korea, the much beloved Mumbai Meera, though the Bangalore edition still survives, and the city magazines that we used to have, Bombay Magazine, Island Magazine, one I used to edit called Time Out Mumbai, have closed. And so there are fewer reporters on the beat. And the existing publications, those that survive, I think the quality, the breadth of what they cover has also shrunk a little for a few reasons. One of them has to do with the very noble motivation of giving readers what they want rather than what they need. And when you do a survey asking readers what they want, for some reason they all want to read about crime, or they say so. And so I'm an old person. When I joined the Times of India 30 years ago, as befits the junior most person, I was given the grunt job, which was to be on the crime beat. And that involved trudging off to the police station and getting the daily crime sheet and reproducing that. Now, some Bombay papers have up to maybe 5 crime reporters, one for each geographical zone. This gave rise a little while ago to what was called the auto rickshaw gang. The auto rickshaw gang had nothing to do with crime, but it had to do with the fact that if you missed a story, your boss gave you hell. So in a certain one of these zones, all the reporters from all the newspapers got together and traveled from one place by auto rickshaw, sort of keeping the competition close, making sure that nobody actually missed a story. So yes, we have a lot of crime coverage. There's an absence of stories about land policy, about land use, and that has to do again with the fact that I think some of the biggest advertisers in Bombay, but I think also across the country, are real estate developers. The front pages of Bombay newspapers almost every day, the most lucrative advertisements are for some new development in a place you've never heard of, which they are marketing as a vibrant new alternative, which means that newspapers are very wary about jeopardizing the interests of these advertisers and don't tell you about the very important things that drive real estate, the policy decisions that the real estate lobby pushes, this kinds of things. What we also have much less of, because I think of the decline of the magazines and feature writing, is covering urban communities and cultures. This means that we have less of a sense of the texture that makes up the city. So city reporting now, at least in Bombay, has been reduced to reporting about potholes, floods, and traffic. Websites like the one Dhanya and I run, this is called the urban beat. And it's important to realize that, the beat system is sort of what developed with the police. The same policeman went from place to place to place every day. And that's what journalistic beats were about. You went to the same set of institutions, the same set of informants. They knew you, and you covered the small things. And so when the large things happened, you were able to put them in context. That doesn't happen anymore. And websites like ours are not rooted in cities. We're rooted in much larger regional questions, which means that we don't do a very good job of covering the things that sort of residents of specific cities need to know to understand the changes that are happening in urban India.
I think that really got off to a great start, because this whole business of journalism being rooted in the city is something that we're missing. This is also because a lot of journalism today is corporatized. So you don't have small newspapers, you don't have local newspapers that are actually looking at local issues so much. You do have the Deccan Herald in Bangalore and so on and so forth. But then they also want to look very national and would rather not look at the tiny details. It has to do a lot, like I said, with ownership as well. So when you have a smaller newspaper that is not owned by a large conglomerate, what happens? So Meera is the best person to tell us about that and how they cover the city.
Thank you. So I've always been a fan of local media, local newspapers, hyper-local little editions, the corner, whatever, Jayanagar Times to Fraser Times to, Adyar Times, and all of these have been things I grew up with. And they're very, very interesting, and not just in India as well as abroad, wherever I travel, I used to keep track of what they actually publish, because this is the best way to understand a city and its people. It's not from, what's going on in your, by looking at the headlines or what's going on at a state or a national level. But what people are doing is something you get a sense of only by looking at the local pages. And about 15 years ago, when, that was a time Bangalore was this boom town. Literally, it was growing, 50%, 100%, 150%. It was growing in terms of population and size. They increase the size of the city. And things were kind of getting quite crazy. And that's a point my co-founder and I figured out, like, there's very little coverage of what's happening locally. A little bit, in page 2, 3, you would have some bits of small reports, 300 words max, to say, oh, commissioner said this, or, earlier there was some mention of mayor as well. But nobody really kind of went beyond. They said this, they announced this, and that was all. Nobody kind of connected the dots, asked the why and the how. Oh, you're talking about a new plan to solve whatever the traffic problem, and what happened to what you talked about last year. So that kind of, making those connections and adding perspective was missing, which is sort of why we said, okay, this is a city of, that time it was 8 million, now it's 12 million. That time we compared it to Belgium, now we compare it to Sweden. But it's a complex city, things are messy, and everyday life is painful. So this kind of deserves a lot more deeper attention to understand what's going on and why are they so broken and how things can change. So that's sort of why we started Citizen Matters as a local news magazine. In fact, initially we had the print edition as well, a lot of hyper-local editions, and it was so. It was really nice and very impactful as well. You could see the community come out, share their stories, engage, and they learn things about each other. They would say, oh, I didn't know this little whatever school is doing this, has this cool new initiatives. So that was really nice. It served as a community glue. Unfortunately, we know the way media model kind of panned out, and we kind of evolved into purely online digital media. And we've also kind of took a step back and focused more on systemic issues, because that is, as we evolve to a non-profit, it's important to kind of understand and see how we can help, what kind of impact we could have. But yes, there is still this huge gap in our cities. There is very little local and hyper-local stories. What's happening in the neighborhood? Why, which areas are getting water? Which areas are like completely ignored by the public transport? None of these stories really come out. So, yeah, that's sort of where we are. And right now we're focusing on, Citizen Matters is civic media, and we also do a lot of open data and a lot of back-end work that happens in terms of citizen engagement to kind of put it all together, to make sense of it, look at the macro issues and look at, oh, these are the systemic issues. This is where this is why you see these symptoms. Your pothole is only a symptom. Your garbage is only a symptom. They're deep-rooted causes inside. So that's something important to understand. We also try to look at a micro level, what is actionable, what can you as a citizen do, and create these explainers and things to do as well. So, yeah, thanks.
Moving from a print edition to a web edition is usually a little tricky, because you actually lose, I think, you lose a bit of your readership. But though we do say that over the last few years, we've only got, most newspapers can't afford to do anything else. You just afford to bring out a web edition. Somebody like Dhanya has taken on the challenge of doing 4 states, and really, really local within those 4 states. It's just fantastic. The question is, are you able to influence anything? Are you able to bring about what we think could be some amount of raising awareness and so on and so forth? Does that happen?
So, okay, that's a tough question. I have to think of specific examples, but I have to agree with Naresh that websites like the News Minute or the Wire or the Scroll, we are not rooted in cities. For example, this is half a joke, but a lot of people online ask us, why are you so communal? Why are you always writing about Muslim, Hindu, hijab, etc., right? So I tell them, calm down. When B.S. Yedurappa was in power, we were writing about potholes a lot. We were writing about tree felling, and because we don't have time to write anything else now. Understand that we have 2 reporters or 3 reporters in the city, in the state. Literally, we have time for nothing else than some joker saying we will take off loudspeakers or somebody else saying something else. That's all we do. But I really wish we could do other things. So I would like to take a rain check for the last 1 year. There's been no city coverage, absolutely nothing. So last month we decided enough is enough. You know, Pramod Muthalik will just live somewhere, but we have to do other stuff also. Then we did this. Okay, I muted myself, yes. So we have to tell ourselves that, look, the news cycle will go on, but you have to stop and write about your city, about the district, about the town. Half of the time, this is a reminder we have to give ourselves, whether it's Chennai, Hyderabad, wherever. For example, I've covered the Kerala floods continuously for 2-3 years. I went each time. And I'm very scared of the rain now after covering Kerala floods for 2-3 years. It's not like any other flood. It was really terrible. But to continuously cover the problems which is happening in a place like Kuttanad in Kerala, which sees a lot of impact of the flood, in a district like Alleppey, we do keep writing every 1 month, every 2 months, but at some point we can't sustain that in smaller organizations. Like Meera has a Citizen Matters which is dedicated to coverage of these issues, but we are sadly not. I wish we could do more. So I can happily criticize the others who have the staff, but who are still not able to do it. So now I'll go to the second section. So when I read a newspaper like Deccan Herald or the Times of India, I think Deccan Herald does a good job of covering the city. But including Deccan Herald, all of us, when we cover, I think we're very reactionary. Like there are 200 trees are going to be cut somewhere, we are reacting to it. There's a pothole somewhere, we are reacting. We are always reacting. We don't look deeply into what are the policy issues. What is the last story that you remember of the rot of corruption in city management? I mean, biggest problem is corruption. And what is the last investigative piece that any of us have done telling you what is the kind of corruption? For example, when Chennai was flooded during the last rains, it was known to everyone that what collapsed is a smart city management. Where they were supposed to build smart city in T Nagar, that's where it flooded the most. So where did the money go? What was the money used for? So most of these things are connected, but I think we are too reactionary, and therefore our coverage of cities is not good. And that I'm talking about everyone. I mean, Meera said she took a step back and she realized that she should not be reactionary. In fact, when we were talking before the session, she said even then we do a lot of garbage stories. Because we are all like that, right? We react to situations. I was actually telling her that I saw a story 2 or 3 weeks ago in this, I think it's the News 9. They've launched a new website where this reporter is wearing this mountain climbing. He's put on all the stuff, and then he's actually climbing a mountain of garbage. And they have these drone shots. And I'm thinking, why? So many years ago when I was in Times Now, I was made to do this, by Arnab Goswami, but he didn't make me climb the entire mountain. He just said, stand on a mound. But this guy actually climbed the mountain. But people are doing different things to cover, because they also think that the readership is very poor for these stories. That much I can tell you. I run a website. If I put a story saying, Nayanthara's new movie will have Nayanthara romancing somebody, nobody will share the story. But I know 1,000 people have clicked it, right? If I put a story saying mangroves in Chennai are in danger, 1,000 people will share it, but one person has clicked it. So this is the hypocrisy of the reader also. We have to call this out. So after a point of time, many people feel, why am I covering this? So it's not like a newspaper, right? You take a Deccan Herald, you are forced to read from beginning to end because you've bought it. But in a website, it's a democratic process. You're not going to click. So a lot of people don't feel the urge to even report this because, of course, it is not the same for Bangalore. Bangaloreans read every civic story. Everything. Like lights are not functioning in Indiranagar, they will read. They will read everything. So I don't know about Bombay, but here the readership is very high. Chennai hardly reads anything about their city, I feel. Bangalore people read quite a bit. Maybe Bangaloreans felt that the media is not doing enough for them, which is why we have such a robust citizen-led movement. I mean, every place you go to, right? Bangalore has had a lot of change because of citizens. And maybe because the media failed them. I will just end this by saying that I wish we all covered it more. I have done a lot of reporting in the last 19 years, including, going to disaster-prone zones or interviewing politicians, etc. But my neighbor recognized me recently only because of one story. So I was very tired of Bangalore's potholes. So one day I told my camera person, let's go and just shoot all potholes. So I did this half a day. I went around Bangalore and I drew a map of how many potholes are there. That video did lakhs of views on YouTube and it was going viral on WhatsApp, and people from BBMP were calling me. And they were actually sending me messages saying that Nrupatunga road, they actually laid the road after that video went viral. Then I realized, Dhanya, why did you interview politicians all these years? You should have just covered potholes because the city actually cares. And when we do impactful stuff, it can make a change. But unfortunately, we don't do enough of it.
Thank you. That was so honest and nice. Yeah. So would you like to share your experiences of, does it really make a difference when you do carry stories like this? And how do you actually get the readers to engage in this whole thing?
Hi. So finally, actually I'm coming from 47 degrees Celsius to 29 degrees Celsius from Ahmedabad, so that's the best part so far. Coming back to the work which I am doing, I used to work with Times of India and mostly cover urban issues. And when I started, I was a cub reporter, and most of my reporting was done through Ahmedabad municipal transport buses. I was traveling and doing stories, or through paratransit, auto rickshaw and all. And that's how I got introduced to the urban reporting. And during that time period, there's a lot of JNURM fund which has come into the cities, and the cities were interested to utilize those funds to bringing mega projects and all. And then the BRTS thing happened, cycle sharing, Sabarmati Riverfront Development Project, all these things were happening. But as a journalist, then I got the better exposure of how urban things works, because initially we were doing just simply on the surface part, as someone mentioned that he said or she said, that what we were busy. That other thing, and then when I left journalism, then I realized that I need to continue my voice, and that's how I came with this simple Twitter handle called Urban Voices, because even if I left journalism, journalism hasn't left me. So I thought, can I voice this concern, especially on urban issues? I recently, again, if you look at the Times of India and other newspapers, suddenly civic reporting has gone dead. There is hardly any news on civic reporting. And because these things affect us as a citizen on a daily basis, and yet we don't find mainstream media talking about it or writing about it. And that's how I came with Urban Voices. The idea was simple. How can I amplify the voices? And the point is that the decision makers are on these platforms. So how I can tag them, like potholes. And I strongly agree with this Bangalore Citizens Group. So the Urban Voices Twitter handle, the maximum tag which we receive are from the Bangalore. And they have maximum number of resident welfare association. They have a dedicated Twitter handle, and they tag everyone from CM to MLA to MP, and they will tag all the influencers. So kudos to all of them because they're doing a wonderful job. And I think that needs to be replicated in other cities also, because we need our decision makers to be accountable. And because they are these platforms, they also feel sense kind of a pressure on them. Because people tagging pothole pictures and tagging their Twitter handle, and 100 people are retweeting them, and suddenly they feel the pressure. And that's why I think AMC also came up with this whole Twitter handle where they respond to those queries. So these things are having an impact, but the thing is that we as a citizen has to be more proactive. And I don't know what happened to the mainstream media, what kind of priorities they have, but certainly civic issues is not a priority anymore.
Thank you. So in this whole business of lack of coverage of the city, as it were. And are we losing out in becoming a public record? So one of the things that newsrooms do is be a public record of what's happened over the last so many years. Are we losing out on that? Do we really need to record how urban areas are transformed? And if we don't do it, what happens? What are the consequences of us not covering this? Will the city just disintegrate, or will it just continue as it's going on? Who wants to take this?
Yeah. Tomorrow there's going to be a fantastic session by Robert Stevens, who's done a book called Imaginary City. And Robert, and there's a copy of his book outside, you should look at it, essentially went to the archive and found 300 years of plans for projects in Bombay that were never built. And some of them are, they have to do with pedestrianizing long sections of Bombay. Some of them were slightly eccentric. They had to do with, for instance, creating, we have Elephanta Island, and somebody decided we should turn that into a pub on Sundays, only on Sundays. But to look at Robert's book is to look at a city that has always been in flux, a city that has always recognized that it can do better and that it has problems. So all of this nostalgia for it used to be, so much better in my daddy's time and in my granddaddy's time, he sort of conclusively puts an end to that myth. And I think even that's why it's important to record, the granularity of changes. And I think it's happening in different ways, actually. So now we have a lot of very specific neighborhood books that record change. So even if a newspaper is not doing it, there are other ways in which these are being recorded. It's happening on social media, but social media is ephemeral. And so we have no record of that. But it's really important, as you point out, to know how we've got here. In my neighborhood, for instance, I live in a part of Bombay called Bandra. And one section floods every year. And people were trying to figure out what was wrong with the drainage system. And it's just that if you read the newspapers, you realize that they created a reclamation in the 70s, and they forgot to take the stormwater gutters out to the sea. And once they realized that, they were able to make the drainage better. And so it's important to have that record, just to know, the record can also help us solve contemporary problems.
Kanchan, I just want to go back to one of the earlier points you mentioned. Did Bangaloreans get very active and engaged because the media failed them? I don't think so. I don't think the media was particularly different in Bangalore as compared to any other city. It's been the same the last 15 years that I've been observing very closely. There's nothing different about it. But what's happening here is the cities are failing citizens. There's basically, it's a defensive action saying if you don't do something, things are going to get worse, right? It's getting unlivable. And this in parallel with, there is this trend of social media did impact hugely in terms of getting people to network and learn from each other. So you can imagine Bangalore, this entire peripheral area has grown, right? It's completely new. It did not exist 20 years ago. And all of these people are either new to the area or new to the city. And they had to kind of connect and build their community as their children grew. And, initially they were all toddlers. And in the last 10 years, you could see the way that, as children grow, you kind of start connecting with your neighbors. That's when you interact. If you're bachelors, if you just come to the city, you have the city, you have your office, and then you go out for entertainment, but you're not really connecting with neighbors, right? So as this settling down is kind of getting people more rooted to their neighborhoods. And that's when people realize, we need to fix this. If my child cannot breathe and there's just too much pollution, something has to be done. Right? There is no place, there's no nearby park to go out and play, we need to do something. So I think that realization hits, and therefore people have kind of gotten more engaged. And it's kind of happening in other cities, while yes, Chennai is sort of much more laid back and not more passive about it, but there's still people, smaller groups coming and taking up initiatives, getting involved. Even in Chennai, you see, kind of lakes getting rejuvenated. I wouldn't have imagined it 10 years ago. So things are happening. Hyderabad is very active. Pune is very active. So at some level, I think people are realizing, regardless of media, government, whatever, we need to take action. And once you kind of get the sense, yes, things, and when you get involved, you learn a lot more, and there's a sense of power, even if you have not fixed that pothole, but you this knowledge has kind of empowered you, and people, I don't think, will go back to that. So to that extent, yes, things have changed. The point is, how do we build on this?
But then also a point that you made where you talked about how social media is helping people network so much more. Does that mean the media itself either has to get to social media or become completely irrelevant?
No, media's role is to complement what people already know. They may network on social media to find out, oh, this is happening. Or today, for example, in Bangalore, 100-odd wards actually had ward committee meetings, and as many people would have surely gone and attended it. That's a huge thing. They would do that over, they would connect over their whatever Facebook groups or WhatsApp or whatever. But there is still the information, the details of your, let's say, the expenditure in your ward is not going to be easily available. There is still a very important role that media needs to play to go dig out that information, to go ask the hard questions to the commissioners and all these other officials, right? Everybody can't get, the average citizen doesn't have the time and the capacity necessarily to go and, keep asking again and again. Yeah. So we have to look at it in a complementary way.
Sure. So that's what theorists will tell you, that readers will only look at the media when there is something that interests them and they don't know much about it. Right? Only then, like when you said, when it comes to ward committee budgets and so on and so forth, that is when they get to the media. So how much more forward-looking, like we were talking about media being reactionary, how much more forward-looking can the media get? And how can we, do we really need to work with institutions, with the government, with the NGOs, or with anybody, civic society? Do we really need to involve them? For instance, Deccan Herald, not Deccan Herald so much, but Prajavani has a program called Janaspandana, where they actually organize bureaucrats to meet readers and meet public. And the newspaper works as an intermediary in that. Do we really need to be getting there, or are we sort of losing sight of what we are supposed to be doing? And what is that we are supposed to be doing as media? Dhanya? Or you? Anyone?
So I think one most important factor is of participatory planning, and we don't see that thing is happening in our cities. It's always going to be a one way of communication. We as a citizens not getting involved. Of course, there are also limitations from the citizen sides, but there's hardly any involvement from the civic part, and especially on the big projects or projects which matters to a lot of citizens. There is no any communication happening, and that's why, on social media front, and which is different from traditional media, is that we can able to create that engagement. Still, mainstream media is only pushing their content. There is only effort from their side to create engagement. Citizens are writing about these issues on social media platform, but there are no any consistent engagement from the mainstream media. So that's the major thing which I witness.
I just want to throw in another dimension to this entire debate. We have been speaking a lot about the media should cover more, the media should be more interested. But I want to just point out, especially the Times of India. I want to name the Times of India, not the Bangalore edition, they do a good job. But many other editions do not take into account that all kinds of human beings are part of cities. For example, the people who live in the slums, there's a word that they use for people who live on the pavement. They continuously use that word, that when they're squatters, yes, that squatters have been removed. Squatters have been thrown out. The beach has been cleansed of squatters. And there is absolutely no thought given into the fact that these are human beings who are part of our cities, that we have not made spaces for them, that we have not, like in a city like Chennai, for example, where there has been a lot of thought put into relocating people from from the Kuam or other places where they were living in slums. Where are they relocated? So 20, 30 kilometers away in Perumbakam and places like that, where they have 8, 9 floor houses. There is no lift. There is no water connection. There is no ventilation. Women have to come all the way down 8 floors, take a pot of water, go up. There's hardly any ventilation. So, but most of them are happy because squatters have been sent to Perimbakam, right? We just want our cities to look beautiful. So I think we also need to course correct on how we cover cities. It's not enough that we cover more. It's also enough that we look at all kinds of people and what is it that a city should do for. It's not just about the person living in a gated community or in some IT park and stuff like that, but it's about everyone.
Yeah, I just want to add to it because it's a really, really, really important point. Very little of media coverage is inclusive, really. There is so much happening. We try to follow this principle called news in proportion. There's so many things that matter, but we hardly get time to look at what's happening, in labor unions, what's happening inside slums, what's happening in, inside your individual ward level offices. There's just so much happening, and to some extent, I understand, because end of the day, it's all about budgets and where are you kind of, really focusing, and you want to give something which will get the maximum eyeball. So that pressure is there. You want to just give something that you think your readers care about, but really there is a sense of responsibility that media needs to have in terms of, yes, everybody matters, and how do you do justice to all of that? So I think that's an enormous gap. We have to figure out how to fix it. And it's definitely related to, budgets and media models, business models, all of that. But we can't just continue like this. Because it's really making a difference, like setting of this narrative.
No, I named the paper because they have the largest number of city reporters. And they can do much more service to people living in the city than any of us can, right? That's and they influence policy. So you are just enabling the policymakers to simply take anyone away from their houses, to demolish slums, or just say in one day you are displaced from this place. That's the reason why I took the name.
I just want to add here again. I will not name the publication. Like for Ahmedabad, we have a dedicated BRTS corridor. And suddenly there's a concerted effort to portray BRTS that it's taking away the road space from the car users, despite the fact that it carries 1.5 lakh passengers on a single day. But suddenly we are now reading comments from person who is in a car that how difficult it is for them to commute on Ahmedabad roads, how much time they have to spend at traffic junction because we have dedicated a space for the BRTS. And I basically travel by BRTS. I'm a very strong advocate for the BRTS and public transport because I see its immense power, and people who are using walk, cycle and public transport, they need to be prioritized on our roads because they are not adding to our traffic congestion, they are not adding to our air pollution. And yet there's a concerted effort. Again, I don't know what the priority or whether it's promoters and all, but suddenly there's a whole effort, and maybe in future, if it continues, we might see policymaker taking a decision that we don't need BRTS anymore.
Can I ask a question, Kanchan? So just want to understand, so is this just about your English paper that you see this? Is there a difference in your local language papers?
Hello, yes. So generally it follows English media. So once they get the cue, then they start writing on the same line. And I think it's, the other part is also in terms of our own orientation as a journalist, that we don't get that kind of exposure to understand what urban planning is all about, what urban design is all about, how public transport matters. So when we come, we either learn from our peers, how they are writing. Like for example, best example is still a very common headline: flyovers announced to decongest road. And it's very common, English media, language media, we see it everywhere. And despite the fact that we see again the pictures of flyovers full of cars, and then we'll come with another solution, make one more flyover. And that's what is happening right now.
So what we see here is a bit of a dichotomy from what I've seen in this conversation. On the one hand, you have mainstream media being very elite and looking at only the bigger, looking at what the middle class or the upper middle class wants. And you still have readers engaging with newspapers, with city papers and city issues. Is there, given the narrative in the country just now, and there is a crisis of trust with the media on the one hand, and there is this engagement with the civic issues and readers on the other hand, How do we ensure that readers keep getting engaged, and how do we ensure that the media can actually play a transforming role in how a city runs? How do we do that? Is there a way forward?
I mean, if I can just share what we do, in the sense there is one part, which is the visible part, is a journalism, but there is a lot of work in the back end in terms of, gathering information, in terms of events and engagement and learning and capacity building. I think that's, as a non-profit, yes, we have a responsibility to do that, but your mainstream media, everybody can't be doing this. This is not necessarily media's role. To that extent, I think that sort of will complement. We need more organizations, more people engaging with citizens as well, which you see in Bangalore, but I think it's slowly, it needs to be happening in other cities as well.
So early in my career, I was fortunate to meet a gentleman called Joachim, who was the president of the National Slum Dwellers Association. And then he took his ideas around the world. And he said something that's always stayed with me. He said, to build world-class cities, you need world-class citizens. And the role of the media, as I see it, is to inform citizens, but they have to then take it upon themselves to take action. We are just the intermediary, and we can't have that burden on us because that's not our role and that's not our capacity. But people often speak about how we should get involved with NGOs, we should get involved in advocacy. I think that is to step beyond what we do. Our role is to evaluate all kinds of complex, diverse opinion, and then present what we believe is the version of truth, the version of reality. But then it's on citizens to take that forward.
If I can just add, I feel citizens are also reactionary many times. For example, if a flood happens in your locality, then you are thinking, why did that flood happen? For example, I go back to the Kerala flood. That's the first time they started speaking, like the entire state started speaking about Kasturirangan report, right? Before that, it was just sections of society who were speaking. Now, when everyone was impacted, literally there was no one in Kerala who was not impacted by that flood. So everyone is bothered about what is happening, how are the hills getting eroded, what are the kind of construction. So that kind of a commitment has to come from the citizen also, to understand about the place that you live in. Because there is only this much the media can do. And policy, to influence policy, I think there has to be more citizen partnership. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
But if I can I think there is one observation I'd like to share. In the last, at least dozen years, you see a lot more of people learning, willing to learn, right? So earlier you had this entire dumbing down of, content that we were talking about. But at least now people have the opportunity to, there is good coverage on many of these issues, and there is a chance for people to learn and get it to the next level of understanding as well.
But there is also a lot of resistance. For example, city coverage is not just about road infrastructure, stuff like that, right? For example, CCTV. A city like Hyderabad has some 144,000 CCTVs. So when we write that it is a huge problem of privacy, why do you need so many CCTVs? There's immediate resistance, saying you guys are just in activism mode. So there is also a lot of resistance to some of the city coverage. It's not like Tuticorin when Sterlite was shut down. I get abused on a daily basis even now. That I don't even know why, but that copper export has come down for India, so media is responsible for shutting down Sterlite. So there is a lot of resistance that way to how we cover cities. But like Meera said, people are definitely much more educated now. They understand issues better, and they have to know that it has to be both ways. Everyone has to put in their heads together and find out solutions. And I just want to add, New Indian Express is a really good paper which I feel covers localities well. I wish they did more of it.
No, I was just wondering, is this going beyond, again, the English language? I don't know. I don't think I've read other languages enough to see. Yeah, I think there is a gap again there. At least in English, you do see this deeper coverages now, yeah.
Yep. So this comes back to what Naresh started off on, what the reader wants. Are we going to give them what the reader wants and what the reader needs? Is possibly a a question that we keep asking. But I'm going to take this one step beyond the whole business of the city and the media. But if the media is to cover what the reader needs, and if the media actually has to get 10 reporters on the ground, then probably the media needs more than just corporate funding, right? So then again, the ball is again in the reader's court, to my mind, and how many of us are willing to pay for us to read something, right? So I think all of us over here have been asking, every time we read something in Scroll or a News Minute, it says, contribute by this, that, and the other, because that's really a genuine problem, because how long can you run without enough funding in order to be independent and in order to be able to raise issues that need to be raised, right? So is there anything you'd like to say as famous last words on this whole business of covering cities before we get to questions?
One more gap, if I can identify again, is investigations. Nobody's doing investigations. Yes, it does cost money. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes talent. And like I said, cities are huge, and there's so much muck out there that needs to be uncovered. And I don't know, that's so sad that none of us are able to really get there.
Model for media, also mainstream media. We might portray them as a villain, but they also have many people to feed, and sometimes they have to take a tough call. So again, as you rightly mentioned, we as a citizen also have to start investing in independent media and provide them the support which they need, so that we can get these kind of investigative stories and other stuff. So that's very important.
If you want a last famous line, I can just say, become a member of the News Minute. But jokes aside, I keep asking people, like, 2 years down the line, if you hear the news that the News Minute shut down, or the Scroll shut down, or Citizen Matters shut down, that's not the point to feel sad about, oh my God, why did they shut down? The question to ask yourself now is that, how am I contributing to a media house that I appreciate? Once a month, become a member, subscribe to one organization. And nobody's saying take 10 memberships a month. That is difficult. I mean, I myself find it difficult to ask people. But the point is, all of us have to contribute. See, it's not just only about city building, right? I mean, there are other issues also which the media is more invested into. Therefore, it is our duty. Whether it's, for example, in Malayalam, there are so many small news websites which do a good job. Why I say Malayalam? Because there's not much in Kannada. It's just coming up. Tamil and Telugu are almost nil. So they all are looking for people to invest money. Now, there are no big investors for the media anymore. Nobody wants to put money in the media much. That's the reason why all of us are going to the reader. And another reason is that's a cleaner, easier way to do it, to do things. Therefore, close your eyes and think that if all these guys shut down, would something be missing in my world? And if I don't want that to be missing, then I should be contributing.
I think it's been covered.
Hello. So a couple of years ago, we did a small, Meera is aware of it, Hi, Meera Gauri, did a small experiment where we were, my partner and I, two of us, were aggregating news from different sources. And it was primarily focused on Bangalore. And it was interesting to see certain patterns coming up when you look at News Minute, Citizen Matters, Times of India, and there's a certain repeatability of stories that you see coming, that come up everywhere. Also notice how stories get interpreted differently using the same, the same data sets and stuff. But the other thing that we realized, and we ran into a wall, we did 500 podcasts of this, and then I think we didn't have the bandwidth to do anymore. But another thing we realized was that how Google shows up your photos, there's also a tendency for old stories to get rehashed on a cyclical basis year after year. And that for us was interesting because that would then get picked up by other media houses and just go through these loops of everybody reporting last year's stories as this year's stories, and then the other media houses now reporting this as... And
Bubbles do come on the Bellandur Lake every year. So,
Yeah.
no, I mean, I definitely, like seasonal
So
stories.
so what's the question?
No, this question is like, how much, is there a ratio of like stories that you look to other sources for and that you work on yourself through your own, because we've also seen the ratio of that, like we've extremely skewed the stories where
Do you mean the other media houses, or do you mean...
perhaps other media houses, because some stories keep getting repeated. You see that the same story gets...
Yeah, because
placed.
it's the same issue all over, isn't it? Would someone like to talk about that?
no, see, high probabilities that somebody would have tweeted saying, fish is dead in my lake. So everybody's writing that story. Or one reporter has realized fish is dead in the lake and he has written and everybody else is writing from that report. So these things tend to happen, but the big problem is, let's say Indranagar, for example, has a very active association. Whitefield has a very active association. So we tend to get more things from them, and then everybody just reports on these two associations more. So that is a huge problem, which is why I think there's a lot of repetition over what we report. Right? Like Chittilapakkam Lake in Chennai, they have a very active association. Therefore, you Google Chittilapakkam Lake, so many stories will be there. Because they're also very media savvy. It's a matter of convenience. Somebody's reaching out to me with a story. It's easier for me to report, right?
The way we do it is we build on the previous story. So there's always this connection. But like Dhanya said, there are citizen groups which are much more vocal, much more, savvy in getting the attention of the media. And so for us, since we do a lot of citizen journalism as well, we are very careful to ensure and be as sort of fair and objective as possible and understand their motivation and kind of find that balance as well. So, for example, I mean, if you look at it, a major group would actually be opposing a particular project. And pretty much all media will actually take it up as a campaign. But that's very hard to say. I mean, it's really not media's job to kind of take that position and take up a campaign because we don't know the other side as well. So you have to kind of find that balance and really understand the various groups and their, agendas and motivations and kind of, deal with it. So yeah, but that, again, all that takes time and effort. And
The gentleman.
Hi, I'm Amlan from IIHS. I work on governance. The scope of looking at the city as a problem to be solved and being constantly beleaguered like a citizen about ever-mounting problems that never get solved is one way of looking at the city, and I think it's become a very common trope across media. The city is also a place to be celebrated, because this problem to be solved also makes this whole thing of third worldism, stuff, global, world-class, Singapore, blah, blah. So this idea of the city as a place to be celebrated is not so easy to kind of get through because you don't have a newsworthy item. So what is it that's stopping you guys from doing more human interest, culture beat stories? Because earlier you had these stories, you just didn't call it urban. Yeah, there were stories about stuff happening, but it was not in that, the trademark of urban wasn't there. Now that you have urban, you have crime, you have garbage, you have this, that, which is all very fine, no problems, all of us know it. But what is it that stops you from, because you guys have, we don't have to respond to the demands of the electronic media. It's constantly sensationalist all the time. So is that something are you also influenced by the need to continuously respond to quote unquote issue-based stuff, which is a perennial kind of mountain you need to, it's Sisyphean in that sense. You can't just keep climbing that mountain.
right. If I can just add one line to that, I missed Time Out. Seriously miss. I think that was, while that was very, it had a specific kind of scope, that kind of coverage of culture and community is definitely missing. We used to do a lot of that at a hyperlocal level when we had the print edition and there were people, contributing, we had this nice, whatever, annual day celebration and we did this and there was this dance and the music and the local community, team Jayanagar Herons had this match. That was really nice. But once we kind of took a step back and focused only online, we had, again, limited budget. We said, okay, as a non-profit, where is the most impact that we can do? So that was a conscious choice. But yes, there's definitely a gap there, and I'm hoping other people...
I don't know. I don't think that is deliberate. For example, what issue is bigger than the other? When students are not allowed to go inside a school wearing hijab, and I have 3 reporters, I'm not following a television channel. I don't even watch a television channel. In fact, I think I'm healthier because I don't watch television channels. But am I then going to be writing about the cultural happiness of Bengaluru, or will I put my resource into covering the hijab story, right? It's a matter of resource. If I had 15 reporters, I will put 2 people in writing culture and happiness of Bangalore. But it's about a choice that you make as an organization, that in the time you live in the day that you cover a story, what takes precedence over the other? I'm not saying the calls we take are right. Maybe from your perspective, the calls we take are wrong. And 10 years later, maybe I will also realize that the call I took today is wrong. But for now, what matters to most organizations, I mean, I don't want to talk on behalf of Naresh, but at least there are severe human rights violations. There is so much, so we are not even getting the time to do a lot of things. That is my biggest problem. But like you said, maybe we are missing the point. I don't know. We will have that realization later.
So we actually do a lot of culture coverage. We have a book section, we have a film section, we have a section we call magazine. We consciously go out and look for stories. They may not be rooted in the urban simply because we, as I keep saying, the story we write about Shillong has to appeal to the guy in Srinagar. And so by nature, this sort of the culture stuff we do has to have a national appeal, and therefore loses some of the specific rootedness that it may have. The celebration of the city, actually, I'm not sure we should be doing that, because we are beleaguered and we're being sold false narratives. If I have a city reporter, I want to puncture those narratives. For instance, Bombay is now in the middle of building a big coastal road. It's going to destroy our coastline. We won't be able to see in many parts, you won't see the horizon. This is a public space that is being destroyed in the nature of creating world-class infrastructure. The fact is that if you were to go to New York, for instance, you would see that they built the West Side Highway, and then 30 years after that, they reclaimed the waterfront because they realized that this was a discredited model. And we are being sold discredited models of infrastructure that we are being told is the way the world does it. That is not to be celebrated. And I think so. When you have limited resources, you want to go after these new projects and say there are other ways of doing them. There are better ways of doing them, and the world is doing them in other ways.
Any more questions?
The simple answer is, if we had a lot of resources, we would want to do more things. But unfortunately, it's not there. Seriously.
Hi, my name is Nikita, and I just wanted, it might seem like a very, not that specific a question, but I just wanted to understand how can journalism mainstream the granularity in terms of like caste, class, gender. For example, there is no, in mainstream media, there is no specific focus on, let's say, work done by women, or there's only crime reporting on women. And, that is also not done it's not done in an empathetic way at all. So, they just remain objects of violence. So I just wanted to understand if at all can journalism help with this, help in identifying and amplifying the nuances a little bit better for everyone, because everyone now, from what I understand, is that everyone is reading bites and not really engaging in long form. So now, as you guys engage in long form articles, is there some way to introduce more nuance or sort of engage in a more empathetic sort of reporting and focusing on these intersections of caste, class, gender, ethnicity?
So again, journalism is embedded within the news, within a development. And so you can only do this as you are reporting a story. As I get it, some of what you're saying is, why aren't you putting out encyclopedia entries, right? Or sort of cheat sheets. That's not what we do. So as we report the developments, it's important that we do this. So we've just started a project we call Common Ground, in which we are attempting to do this. Our next story will be about caste bans and the problems it's causing in some parts of South India. We have my colleague in Bangalore, Joanna, who covers gender. I must say that, when you do these stories, it's not like a lot of readers actually want to read them, no matter how well crafted they are. And so I think we come back to sort of the problem that Dhanya has articulated, is which all of these things sound wonderful, but in the age where the appetite is for bite-sized nuggets of news, it's very difficult. Readers don't want them.
No, I think there is a lot of focus in the smaller independent media to talk about caste, class, gender, etc. You should stop reading crime in newspapers. That will be the first service you to do yourself, because crime reporting in newspapers is absolutely a male gaze. That's it. They do not go beyond that. The headlines, material, nothing goes. There are very few reporters who are very sensitive and they write well. You will, I guess, when you read more and more, you'll understand who that is. But as Naresh said, there is a lot of focus, I feel, on nuances and writing about this. But all this cannot happen unless the media changes itself, how media organizations function. We are primarily a media of upper caste people, whether it's male or female. We are mainly based out of cities. And we are not inclusive newsrooms, a lot of us, right? So unless the media itself changes, the change is slow, it is happening, things are not going to dramatically change, unfortunately.
Yeah, but there are a lot of small alternate medias which are doing a good job. So I think it's also important to kind of go and seek them out, because it's hard for them to also do that job. So it's important to support that as well.
The thing is that we also become an in-short generation. We read in shorts and we know the whole story. So that's other side of the problem. And the other thing is also mainstream media, we are deadline driven. And one journalist has to go to 5 places or file 4 or 5 stories. So they don't also get that kind of timing to really go more deep into it and write about the story. So again, there's many issues. It's not so easy, but hopefully it changes someday.
Basically, good that you didn't become a journalist is what I think at the end of this conversation we will be coming to, but not true.
Thanks. I think we can take one last question.
So I think another important role
Two
that media
questions.
plays is to keep the government accountable. But I'm certain in Bombay, a citizen does not participate because they have no information. Everything is locked in. Committees or whatever the bureaucrats are up to is completely out of the domain of the public. So, I understand resources will always be crunched, but is there a way that any of this information comes out in the open? And do you suspect this is the role that media must play?
One thing I want to add there is that's one very good reason why we have a complementary platform called Open City, which is for open data. So where we work with communities, with neighborhoods, or even like generally data geeks to just go, take data from governments as public data, RTI information, and open it up, put it publicly free, open database license, etc. So that's, I think, very, very useful for not just journalists, but also citizens as well. So I think that's a good, important aspect that has to be done in any way. Yeah.
Absolutely, media has to do much more. But I could be wrong, but I feel in the last 5 to 6 years, even the number of, a lot of activists would come to us because they would have taken stuff through RTI. And, even if the media person is lazy enough to file an RTI, there would be somebody else who would have got the documents. But I feel even that has come down a bit now because a lot of officials do not reply to RTI. That's a separate problem altogether. So, we are trying to do a story on smart city corruption in Tamil Nadu. But it's something that we have to remind ourselves every day that we are doing this project, because 2 days before Rajiv Gandhi's killer is released, then, the guy who's doing the smart city project just goes for that. 3 days later, something else will happen. So it's always in the back burner. That's the problem. So we have to continuously tell ourselves to do, like I said, what is the last investigation any of us read about a city? So we have to keep reminding ourselves this.
Never mind. So it seems like kind of the elephant in the room with a lot of these questions is like the economic model seems to be a big part of it, right? And I think one of the kind of solutions that seem to be preferred is the audience kind of funding these newspapers. But I'm wondering if, and by your own admissions, when you say that the audience can be reactionary, like in a lot of contexts, maybe it's in the context of the kind of stuff they want to read or how they want to read it, right? Like maybe they're not seeking the kind of nuance that they need to be those world-class citizens. Doesn't maybe then being beholden to just audience money kind of preclude the media from also potentially publishing stuff that's needed, however you might define that? And I mean, I personally just want, like, I think the dissemination of information through the media is like akin to like a fundamental right. And maybe if we start thinking of it like that, we can build economic models that also preserve it in that way, perhaps.
So I don't think any of us are looking at audience revenue as the only source of revenue. All of us have different things. Like, for example, there are foundations. We work with the IPSMF Foundation here. We had a section called Dell. It was only long form stories. For 4 years, we worked with them. Meera, I'm sure, works with a lot of foundations. I think The Wire, for example, is one of the only platforms which is able to sustain with, I mean, according to The Wire, they have sustaining with the revenue from the audience. So it is not one thing. Like I said, if I want to just write what the audiences want, it is a very dangerous trend to follow. Audiences want something really different. So no, that's never the parameter. Audiences will pay when they feel the necessity or when they love a media house or they like a story, but that can't be our only revenue model.
Yeah, like Dhanya says, so traditionally people got money from advertising. And in India, one of the reasons that people don't pay for online media is the fact that our newspapers are almost free. Starting with the Times of India, they push the prices down. In Pakistan, you'd pay 5 or 8 times the amount for a newspaper. Every time you go to Western Europe or North America, that is several times a cup of coffee sometimes, or maybe even the cup of Starbucks coffee. How many people are willing to pay for the price of a Starbucks coffee, which is what, $150 every day to read Scroll or News Minute? And once people are willing to do that, we'll be on a much firmer ground.
All right, thank you very much. This has been, as usual, a very engaging and lively discussion. Well, I think Sophia will take over from here.
Thank you, Kanchan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, panelists, for a lively session and telling us why media is vital to the sustainability of our cities.